My name is Caroline Green. I'm the Director of Research at the Institute for Ethics in AI. I'm here in the Humanities building. We've just moved in here, so welcome to those of you who have not been in this building before. I'm the lead of the Accelerator Fellowship Program, and it's a real pleasure to host Ambassador Audrey Tang here today for this Expert Insights series. Ambassador Tang is Taiwan's Cyber Ambassador and First Digital Minister, as well as 2025's Right Livelihood Laureate for advancing social use of digital technology to empower citizens, renew democracy, and heal divides. And as I'm sure you can imagine, and you know, there is a very long CV with a lot of accomplishments that comes with this 2 sentences. So congratulations again for your award, Audrey, very well deserved. And we're so lucky to have you here. So Audrey is an inaugural fellow at the Institute for Ethics in AI's Accelerator Fellowship Program. And her project with us looks at developing a civic AI approach and the 6-pack of care framework, which you will be hearing about more in the next 15 or 20 minutes or so. And then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So I'm really lucky because I don't only have a great job here at the Institute, but I get to collaborate with Audrey on her project. And before I hand over to her, I want to tell you a little bit about the day that we really first met and we started our collaboration, because that was a really meaningful day for me. And it will give you a little bit of context how we're working together and why we're working together. So we recorded a podcast a few months ago, 3 or 4 months ago, where Audrey was telling me all about the concept of plurality, the importance of collaboration between humans and AI systems, and so on. And I found there was so much hope in it, because it was somebody I was talking to who was telling me that, you know, there's actually a good society is possible with AI and technology, when often there's so much of a narrative of existential risk, of people being excluded or not being part of the journey, right? So after the podcast recording, we went on a walk past Rhodes House, past the Natural History Museum, and we were talking about the concept of care and just how important it is to have caring relationships, caring societies, caring leaders. And we thought, oh, how beautiful would it be if we had caring AI? If we could think about AI working towards relational health as the ultimate outcome, and where it's all about deconstructing the silos of what seems very elitist, often computer scientists working behind perhaps closed doors on AI systems, policymakers who are making policies for people who in the end have these systems integrated into their lives without much meaningful participation here. And this is really where the idea for Civic AI and the 6-pack of care was born. And why did we call it the 6-pack of care? Because we felt that caring for each other can actually be quite difficult. It is an exercise for us. We need to practice it, and we need to meaningfully practice it so that we can strengthen our muscles. And that's where the idea of the civic muscle came from. And then as the next step, we thought, well, this is such a hopeful way of looking at AI, the way that humans interrelate with each other, with AIs, and AIs with other AIs. And then we found Joanne Tronto's work, The Ethics of Care, and that's where the 6-pack of care was born. And now I will hand over to Audrey, who will be talking more about civic AI, the whole idea and philosophy behind it, and specifically on the attentiveness, so the first pack. So welcome, Audrey.
Thank you, Caroline. They mic'd me up, so I don't have to use the handheld. And really, I welcome interruptions. So in the next 15 or 20 minutes, if a burning question comes to you, or if I speak some jargon that you feel that simply must be expanded or double-click, just let me know. But otherwise, as Caroline said, we'll have plenty of time for discussion as well. So last year in Taiwan, in March, we faced a flood of AI-generated scam. I would wake up and open Facebook and see Jensen Huang, the Taiwanese NVIDIA CEO, speaking to me in fluent Mandarin, offering me investment advice or free cryptocurrency. And of course, it's not Jensen. It's a deepfake clone of him running on NVIDIA GPU. And what many people have seen in Taiwan is that if we poll people individually, like what should government do about such rampant deepfake scams, people by and large say we're the most free in all of Asia when it comes to internet freedom, and therefore the government should stay out of the censorship. But if you also look at how the population is reacting to those scams, they become increasingly convincing. So much so that we cannot just count on so-called literacy or other educational materials to overcome those scams. So we face a dilemma. We value internet freedom, and we must, of course, regulate them. But also, when polled individually, people are like, never in my backyard should the government step into the freedom of expression. So what did we do? So we took a turn to be attentive. That is to say, we sent 200,000 text messages to random numbers around Taiwan with only one simple question: what should we all do together when it comes to information integrity online? And so I think this is vastly different from most of the other top-down way that tech policy is done these days. Usually, experts have an idea of what counts as fraud or what counts as proportionate response and so on, and then they accelerate, introduce some policy until there's a backlash, and then they backpedal, and then they try again. So instead, we ask basically lay people, 200,000 people, and thousands of them actually stepped up and say, we want to be included. If you run a citizen assembly online, we want our voice to be heard. So out of these, we chose randomly 400 people, 450 people, and statistically representative of the Taiwanese population. So they have the same ratio as the wider population when it comes to occupation, place they live, gender, so on and so forth. And so they come to deliberate online. But instead of polling them individually, which we already know will only lead to extreme positions, we poll them in groups of 10. So 45 rooms of 10 people each deliberated. And we said upfront that only the bridging ideas, only when the group of 10 found uncommon ground, that is to say things they agree on that they didn't imagine they would agree on stepping into the room, will it get cross-pollinated outside of the room. And so, for example, one room suggested that we should simply display all advertisements as probably scam until Jensen Huang or whomever provide a digital signature, a KYC, know your customer. That's a good idea. And another room of 10 said, if it's an investment scam and people lost, say, $7 million to it, Facebook should not just be fined. Facebook should be liable for the full $7 million because we did not subscribe to that content, right? It is not a freedom of speech issue. We're, of course, not taking anything down, but Facebook is an accomplice in pushing these things to people's eyeballs. Of course, they should be liable. So that's another idea. And another room says TikTok, ByteDance at the time did not have a Taiwanese representative office. So even if we make them liable, they can just ignore us. So what to do in this case? And that room says we should not censor its content, but we should slowly dial down the connection speed to their video servers so that the experience would suffer a little bit and then their business would go to their competition. So it's not modulating away speech, but it's modulating away reach. And so these are kind of surprising ideas that the policymakers simply did not have as the toolkit. So instead of running a survey to let people evaluate from a slate of policy options, this kind of generative polls are very transformative as well. And in those 45 rooms, if you have human facilitator, of course, it usually would take a week or so for them to come together and just meld together their minds into policy proposal. But because these rooms are facilitated by AI systems, these AI systems are very good at mind melding. And so after just 3 hours of conversation, we melded these proposals to draw this Overton window together. And then the experts provided real-time commentary on the feasibility of these measures. And then we have an exit poll of such. And so the 450 people voted. And we showed to the legislature at the time, we have 3 parties now which have majority, so a lot of fighting. But we showed them over 85 80% of population in this cohort agree with this core set of bundle, and of the remaining 15%, nobody is very unhappy with it. And so anybody who don't pass this core set of proposal will be seen as a pro-4 party, and nobody wants to be the pro-4 party. So that was last March. And so the laws passed in May and July, respectively, that there's 2 enabling laws. And so this year, if you scroll in Facebook in Taiwan, you just don't see any deepfake ads anymore. So the problem is solved. And so I hope this is a good kind of exhibit A of what attentiveness look like. It is the practice of giving the people closest to the pain real, ongoing power to steer the technology, to draw the red line together in a way that is continuously integrating the society. So this is not just a political tactic. It is a ethical foundation as well. As Caroline alluded to, we look at the ethics of care, specifically from John Toronto, who have 5 pillars that starts with attentiveness and goes on to assume responsibility, to have competence in delivering care, and to be responsive to the care receivers' feedback, and finally to have solidarity, to make plenty of care, to make it a societal norm. And then we added to it the idea of symbiosis or symbiogenesis, of getting the AI system to be as local as possible so they can fuse with the community norms instead of having one global norm. So these 6 packs together form the 6-pack of care. And today I will just expand on the attentiveness, the first step, but I welcome conversations on other steps as well. So it's a kind of a pun. It's both the 6-pack as in muscle, but also 6-pack as in beer, like very portable methods that people can deploy anywhere. And so to understand why we need this way to think beyond and complement the existing utilitarian maximizing one number way of training AI, or the antic way of following some top-level rules way of training AI, why do we need a third pillar, a care pillar? And then it's because otherwise, it's very difficult to answer the outer alignment problem, which is what are we pointing the values of AI toward, whose values and whose intentions. And the dominant approach today is largely top-down or vertical. It's highly centralized, dominated by a small handful of actors. And they, of course, have some model spec constitutions and so on that define what is aligned behavior. But the thing is that when things go wrong, like there's no comparable process to the deliberative generative poll thing that I just mentioned in those large AI companies. So they do apply patch fixes, like if they have seen, AI-induced psychosis, over-reliance, over-sycophant behavior, and so on. Usually they fix that in like 3 days or 4 days, but there really is no accountability of whether the fix actually works. And also the way that fixes apply is very opaque and really do not include meaningfully the experiences of the people affected, the same way that we included people who have been defrauded and so on. And so the centralized approach is then deeply inattentive. It is structurally incapable of noticing the mismatches, especially chronic mismatches. So instead of just the acute ones of who is being harmed immediately, it is actually very difficult to see for sure, for example, whether the cultural delta, like the differences between a local culture versus the dominant US culture, and how much ChatGPT and other related systems agrees with the local norm when it comes to societal decisions. The farther away the cultural distance, also the farther away the delta. And they will then do more than just make errors, because they will begin to redefine what the society treats as good or as truth, and whose experience qualifies as evidence. And this is not the first rodeo. We have been here before, because 10 years ago, we have seen in Taiwan a spike in polarization and mutual distrust when the dominating social media platforms switched from a regular feed of the following feed. Like if we follow the same poster, we see the same blogs or microblogs. And 10 years ago, they switched to a parasitic AI system, the For You feed, that tries to figure out like what motivates us and engagement through enragement and so on. And what this have resulted is what I call a very high ppm environment. And I don't mean CO2 carbon parts per million. I mean polarization per minute, because the AI system, the parasitic recommendation engine, figured out that the more extreme extreme you give the megaphone to, the more people want to argue online. And that's actually the sure way to keep people glued to their screens. So they all become like addicted users. And so we sometimes talk about putting human in the loop, like through moderation and things like that. But when the recommendation engine is this fast and this powerful, it feels like human in the loop of AI. It's like hamster in a hamster wheel. So I mean, it's in the loop, and hamster probably feels great because it needs the exercise, but there is no steering power at all when you put human in the loop of AI that's just spinning faster and faster. And so in the social media case, what we eventually agreed on, like 10 years after the fact, is that we need to have a bridging algorithm, which recent research showed that is probably the only intervention that have some hope of working to reduce the polarization per minute. Now, I assume some people here have experienced what's called community notes on x.com, which are kind of the footnotes that are contributed by the community, now also communicated by AI, some of them drafted by Grok or Gemini or whatever other AI models to add missing context to a viral post. And the way community notes work is that you can see people upvoting and downvoting on each other's notes. Usually, for example, the left wing votes a particular way and the right wing votes the other way. They seldom agree on each other's voting. However, there's just a few notes for every post that are upwing. That is to say, they get the unlikely upvote from both sides of the political aisle, and then the algorithm just make them float to the top. So instead of giving the megaphone to the extreme, this gives the virality, the megaphone, to the middle ground, to the uncommon ground, exactly the way that the Taiwanese system that we've been using for the past 10 years, including Polis, the electoral polling, and things like that. And so it's a move from this centralized way to define top-down what counts as fact-checking, what counts as useful footnotes to a viral post, and to delegate that power from a vertical way of control to a horizontal way of co-creation. And this builds attentiveness then to the design, which is what is currently lacking in the current AI alignment efforts. So we have some sort of social media alignment layer now using community notes, but there's no comparable layer in the AI conversation. So how would we scale this attentiveness in the age of AI? Well, then we need to build the infrastructure for steering. As I mentioned, we need to move out from this hamster wheel, human in the loop of AI, into what's AI in the loop of humans. And so by flipping the script, we need to make 3 interventions. And here are just some early examples that have worked in a small jurisdiction or have some interesting pilots, but all taken together, I believe, they can make attentiveness the norm for the AI industry. And therefore, who is not attentive then will be just called careless, basically, and face social sanction. One idea is building this public citations with model specifications. As I mentioned, many AI frontier labs are now already making the so-called constitutions or model specifications public and versioned. So at least you have a document like this is how their AI systems should behave. But currently, if you ask a chatbot a difficult moral question and so on, and it deviates from the model spec, you cannot really ask, why are you answering things this way? There's just no citations. And if you see the changes of model spec, not only this top-down, but it's also very difficult to bring your own policy, like in your culture, in your locality, in your community, if you want to reorder the priority of model spec somehow. Although it's literally just a markdown file, it's a text file. It's very easy actually to co-create. There's previously no way to say to the AI system that this is the policy now that I want you to answer, and also provide citation of why are you answering this way. So that is finally being changed last week. So last week, we as the ROOST, the Robust Open Online Safety Tools Alliance that we launched in Paris earlier this year, work with OpenAI to open up the so-called safeguard model it's called GPT-OSS safeguard. And what it does is that it's a small enough open model that runs on this laptop. I actually did run this on my laptop. And what it does is that it takes what's called a bring your own policy, what constitutes as like good speech for your community. And each community may have very different norms. One may talk about, I don't know, climate justice. Another may talk about creation care. So maybe the same ideas, but very different norms and words and so on. But it doesn't matter. It's not opinionated. So as long as you have this model spec, a community-based model spec, then it starts working. It can give you a classification of each response and whether that response is conforming to the local policy. It provides the reasoning trail so that it maybe have to make trade-offs between many priorities in the policy, and it explains the trade-offs. And if the policy is worded in a way that's ambiguous, it also points out that it's ambiguous, and so you can go back and change the text file and then change the behavior immediately. You do not have to retrain or curate a large data sets and so on. So this transforms the policy alignment from just a matter of faith and waiting for 6 more days for it to retrain from the large labs into something that the community can run and is verifiable by journalists and the civil society. So this is a technical part, which is public spec with the citation engine. The other thing is that we need incentives that rewards responsibility. Again, I think social media provides a very good example. So in the state of Utah, there is a new law called the Digital Choices Act that says starting next July, if you are a Utah citizen, you can move from, say, TikTok or X.com to, say, I don't know, Blue Sky or Truth Social, and the old network have to keep forwarding your followers, your likes, your reactions, or whatever, to the new network. So this is like when you're switching telecom from one telecom to another, you get to keep your number portability. Because without this mandatory interoperability and portability, of course, the existing players can get away by squeezing the freedom of expression, by being careless and so on, because they know individually we would not switch to a new network because we will lose access to our community. By saying that essentially when you build an information superhighway, you have to build an off-ramp and an on-ramp and keep it interoperable. It removes that misaligned incentive. And so that if you apply this thinking, and now I think the European Union is considering expanding the Digital Markets Act to also include social platforms, exactly the way that Utah is doing. So think about applying this to AI systems so that we can have a human context protocol, not just a model context protocol, that we can bring our context across different AI systems. And you can even think like to look at them like the telecoms, that's to say utilities, so that they have to continue to provide universal service through this kind of interoperability and portability. So that is a very exciting policy area that has worked for telecoms and banking and so on, and is now working for social media. And if we apply this to AI systems, then I think this will also motivate them to be much more attentive, because again, the inattentive options will lose customers because the customer can take all the context with them. And finally, the third thing is what I call pluralistic community models. As I mentioned, the agentic AI systems, most recent research show that if you know what agents is doing, that is to say if it have specific roles in your community, it doesn't actually need a huge model. It doesn't need to memorize the entire Studio Ghibli repertoire or something. It can actually just work from that text file that the community introduced as a code of conduct for that local agent. And so I was just in Japan, and in Japan, they have this idea from the Shinto spirituality that they have called a kami. Kami is written in kanji, exactly the same word as God, but it means something very different. It means a local steward. So there may be a kami for a river, a kami for a village, in which case called ujikami, and then or a kami for a plot of land. And what it cares about is only the relational health of people and beings in that plot of land or river, but it does not actually want to maximize maximize anything else. Like it doesn't want to maximize the amount of paper clips production or things like that. So a local spirit attuned to the relational health of a specific place is not just more energy efficient and is actually, frankly speaking, much more attainable as a goal. And turns out most people just want that sort of kami instead of something that wants to maximize some random abstract number everywhere. And so if we do that turn, if we say that the AI governance must be pluralistic, adaptive, truly attentive to specific communities, making communities first class, then there's a new set of things that we can do. For example, the safeguard model that I just mentioned can also be trained as a translational bridge between the climate justice community and the creation care community, so that both sides can speak using their epistemic norms and build bridging conversation between the two. And these two communities have complete steerability over such local kami models without having to rely on one single thing that acts as the arbiter. And so that is what we, Caroline and I, refer to as exercising our civic muscle in those local civic gym, because turns out it's very easy then just to come into a conversation like this one and record the conversation, turn this transcript into that sort of markdown file that controls a local kami behavior. So before, attempting a national conversation about how to fight deepfake or things like that, which is still like very doable and inexpensive and doesn't actually require more investment than regular polls, many communities can start doing that with the help of a mayor or just a town leader or even just a school, a class, and so on. And in doing so, many policymakers are now being tempted by the complete automation method. So instead of a group of 10 meeting together and coming up with uncommon grounds, a very attractive alternative is to have a chatbot interview those 10 people individually and build these digital twins and have those digital twins doing the deliberation. And again, research like Habermas machines and so on have shown that it does produce pretty good policies, but it is like sending my robots to the gym to exercise for me, to lift the weights. I'm sure that robots can lift a lot of weight, but the muscle atrophy this way. So attentiveness does require practice, but what we can do is to make sure the translation, the summarization, the topicalization is done by those assistive, attentive kami robots, so that it's like an exoskeleton that help us lift better weights, but it's still the community lifting those weights. Okay, so that is my initial remarks. The vertical approach, I think, is showing the cracks, and we do need to move toward public, portable, and pluralistic ways to steer AI together. To close, I offer a prayer, a poem, because I was Taiwan's first digital minister in 2016. And in Taiwan, 数位 means both digital and also plural. And so I was also the minister for plurality. And because I was the first digital minister, there was no job description. So I wrote this prayer as kind of an HR form of what I would do as first the digital minister and now the cyber ambassador. It goes like this. When we see Internet of Things, let's make it an Internet of Beings. When we see virtual reality, let's make it a shared reality. When we see machine learning, let's make it collaborative learning. When we see user experience, let's make it about human experience. And whenever we hear that the singularity is near, let's always remember the plurality is here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Audrey. So we've now got around half an hour for Q&As, and this is how it's going to go. I was just wondering how we integrate all the people who are in the other room. Maybe the team can find a way. But first of all, I'm going to focus on this room here. I'll take around 3 questions or so, and then I'll have a look online for people online, and I'll read out questions. So if anybody online has got questions, please put your questions in the chat, and then I'll read them out here. Okay, so who would like to comment, ask a question? So I've got a hand up here. I'll just bring the mic to you. I've already got 3, and I'll try and get to everybody. But also just to let you know, we will take questions afterwards too, and we've got an approach for integrating everybody. So here we go.
Thanks. I've got a question about time and intergenerational care, intergenerational ethics. So A few years ago, I wrote a book called The Good Ancestor, How to Think Long-Term in a Short-Term World. And I know you've spoken about being a good enough ancestor. And as I was listening to you today, I was thinking about, well, how do we integrate a kind of parameters of intergenerational justice and intergenerational care into AI systems? Because we know that future generations have very little voice in today's political systems or democratic systems. There's a tyranny of the now, a tyranny of the present tense. So what mechanisms or principles can we use, technically or otherwise, to give a voice to those future generations, the citizens of tomorrow, not just to the citizens of today?
Amazing. Yeah, that's a great question. I was born with a heart defect. So when I was 5 years old, doctors told me and my parents that this child have a 50% chance of surviving until heart surgery. And I got a surgery when I was 12. I'm still around, last I checked. But I really got into me this habit of what I call publish before I perish. So ever since I was 4, I would record whatever I learned that day. And I don't have time to be perfect, right? So first on cassettes, and then floppy disks, and then finally the internet. And I think that's why I call myself, my aspiration, a good enough ancestor, because I don't have time to be perfect ancestor. And also, perfect ancestors are very boring because they foreclose possibility space for the next generation. And so I think to your question, with this good enough ancestor view, we need to make sure that the future generations are left with more choices. So that even though their voice we cannot anticipate at this moment, we must leave them with more materials to work with. So instead of foreclosing any potential possibility space, we need to be maximally pluralistic in the sense that if new values emerge from the next generation, they can see our current practices like Lego blocks and then reassemble to configure their communities whichever way they can do. And this really informs the last 2 parts to be as positive sum as possible and also be as local as possible. So in the 6-pack framework, we call them solidarity and symbiosis in particular. So imagine like the current way of training larger and larger AI systems, and the large AI system also now does some AI research, and then the next generation will need less human input in training the next version, and the next version will need even less human input until such a day it needs no human input at all in training the next thing. It's called a vertical takeoff, right? Superintelligence. But then if we got the values fixed at that stage, then maybe it thinks itself as a perfect ancestor. But then it also forecloses every other possibilities in the future likelihood, because there's literally no way for human like generations of humans to enter, except as maybe pets to that super intelligence. And so I think that is the dystopia that we're trying to avert. And now using this idea of local kami, that's symbiosis, and also a positive sum like solidarity infrastructure, what we're trying to do is that it's almost seen as techno-communitarian rather than techno-progressive. Instead of faster and faster takeoff vertically, we're doing the alignment horizontally, so that we, the people in a community, can see ourselves as a superintelligence. And then the AI systems running locally just unlock our latent superintelligence within that community and also foster inter-community conversation, so that when the next generation come and they want to form their own community, they can tap into this solidarity and symbiotic infrastructure. So I hope that tackles a little bit of your question. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I had those 2 hands up here too, so I'll just come here and then to you. Sorry, let's find my way.
Thank you. Hi, Audrey. Great talk as always, is the case. As you know, my work is in moral imagination, which is really around using the imagination as a tool to expand our empathy with the more than human world, with future generations, with people different to ourselves. And I see that as a core civic muscle. And one of the challenges I come to a lot in my work, which I'm curious to hear, how you tackled that, is that the forces that we're up against are forces that manipulate, our minds, our neurotransmitters, our deepest nervous system, wiring for inattention, for polarization, for anger, for short-sightedness. But how do we create infrastructures of freedom? Because we don't want to create a kind of an equally manipulative mechanism, to try and kind of train people to think freely. So it's just there's a sort of paradox there around not wanting to manipulate freedom, but equally it's really difficult to be up against highly manipulative and targeted weapons, but not kind of fall into a weapon approach ourselves.
Yes.
Hope that makes
Great
sense.
question. Yes.
Great.
Well, Dalai Lama, I believe, said, without positive vision, there is no positive action. Right? So having a very concrete story, a positive vision that people can tell to each other, and with nice comics, I think that is that is really the first step, because it serves as inoculation. In Taiwan, we call it humor over rumor. Like whenever, because we're the top in the world when it comes to being on the receiving end of polarization manipulation from our not very friendly neighbor, and so we're very good now at pre-bunking it, because the thing with polarization attack is that it's not, strictly speaking, disinformation. Like if you actually look at the content, they're not factually wrong. They're just very strong feelings, very strongly expressed. And it tends to go viral because people take a lot of actually dopamine, right? There's like addiction in encouraging each other to express your outrage in a way that's deeply polarizing. It's also deeply satisfying for many people. They feel like a new sense of belonging, being in one pole or the other pole. And so in order to debunk that, we need to do it beforehand, because debunking that after the fact really doesn't work. It just reinforces whatever incentive that was already misaligned for polarization. But pre-bunking it, that is to say, to share a humorous take so that people have a shared positive vision that depolarize the entire conversation, that always works. So one example. In early 2020, and in the beginning of the pandemic, we saw on the social media two very polarized mimetic strains. One says because Taiwan had a SARS experience and people understood that N95, the highest grade of mask, is quite useful. And so there's a strain that says, the government is rationing out just medical grade mask, but actually only N95 is useful. Everything else is just placebo. We should insist on it. And another strain says it's ventilation, it's aerosol. It's just good air, and actually wearing a mask hurts you. N95 hurts you the most. And in early 2020, the science is still undecided on which side is actually telling the truth. But we immediately pre-bunked that message. So very next day, in the 2 p.m. daily press conference, we pushed out this very cute meme with a Shiba Inu, the Doge dog, putting her paw to her mouth, saying, "Wear a mask to remind each other to keep your dirty, unwashed hands from your own face." So now the mask is just a protection from dirty hands. And this reassociates the valence, the feeling toward mask. So if I want to wear a mask and you don't want to wear a mask, I'm just reminding you to wash your hands. And we measured tap water usage. It really did go up. But the thing is once this reassociation, this humor over rumor is done, then it's more fun to share this humor. And it's not fun anymore to fight each other because it pre-bunked the kind of psychological tenor of that conversation. So just by keeping attentive to the both sides of polarization, surfacing the uncommon ground, making the uncommon ground irresistibly funny, you can actually depolarize and move beyond the misaligned incentives. And AI systems are actually quite good at synthesizing large amount of polarized conversation and find the uncommon ground. This is one of the insights that community nodes team are now putting into production, basically making sure that the language models are now the primary drafters, the first drafters of community nodes this way. Thank you.
So I'm going to take one more question from this room, and then we've got the other room who are able to ask questions too. So I'll just come to you.
Thank you so much for your talk, Audrey. I am in total awe of what you did in Taiwan, and I think your work is super important for the future of humanity. My, my question relates to the fact that there are global problems as well as local problems. So, for example, we have climate change that has to be addressed globally. And we also have problems about international firms who follow the place where they can make the cheapest expenditure and the most profit. So, for example, if you, in a locality, improve labor relations, let's say, or you prevent firms from polluting the atmosphere, then capital and big firms will go to other countries. So it seems to me that we somehow need to have some worldwide democratic device that consults people across the world. And I'm just wondering whether you've got any thoughts on that.
Yes, I totally agree. And I would also add that when people engage in transcultural conversations, where the 9 other people in the same virtual room are all from different cultures, sometimes it is where the most creative ideas get generated. We, as part of the Collective Intelligence Project, run the Global Dialogues, which is every 2 months global conversation involving people from 70 or so countries, randomly selected, just like the Taiwan case, to talk about the most imminent risks, but also opportunities posed by AI. So for example, the last one was around AI-induced human hallucination, which is a big topic, AI companionship over reliance, and many, actually also the evolution of trust. So one of the Global Dialogues results was that people consistently trust the AI chatbots more than the, for example, locally elected representatives. But then they trust those MPs more than the companies that made the AI systems. There's a very consistent 30% delta between people's trust to chatbots advice and also the companies making those chatbots, which it was partly what prompted this idea of a public, portable, and pluralistic AI, which is why people can then have chatbots, but that are fiduciary to the relational health of their community, instead of just the company that makes them. So that's a very good insight. So to your question, I think the more we share the generative ideas, the policy ideas from those global dialogues, and also the globally sourced evaluations, benchmarks of what constitutes as good to their local community. So there's a WeVal, W-E-V-A-L, Wiki-Eval project, also from CIP. So it's on both ends, attentive to the emerging opportunities and harms and ideas, and also then holding this as benchmarks. And any AI system that do not fit in those locally sourced benchmarks, then we can point to them and say, oh, it's like, I don't know, depleting the ozone or things like that, and make a global norm, because global norm also travel very fast. Of course, capital travels fast, but if you make a global norm and point out that this consistently decreases the polarization per minute and so on, then any AI systems that do not implement such measures, which are not expensive to implement, will be seen as essentially committing a global crime of some sort. So I think propagating those norms and crowdsourcing, keep crowdsourcing these norms using generative polls, these two taken together, I think is a good flywheel toward the kind of global awareness of what constitutes as an attentive AI system.
We've got an online question. The seminar is subtitled Building Technology That Strengthens Democracy. And what can citizens society do to ensure the AIs or processes used in democratic process in a classroom, a village council or municipality actually have a six-pack of care or practice that? As WeVal or other benchmarks like AI Energy Score for Open Models, which TED Talk by Sasha Lucchioni recently touched on, can show what a model is like. Can democratic processes be gauged like it?
So I hear two questions, actually. One is, how do you actually measure relational health? So in such a democratic conversation, what are the kind of numbers that people can show, or checkbox people can tick to show that this is actually attentive, actually responsive, and so on. So that's one. The other is like how can we make sure that the existing AI technology, especially open models, fits these criteria? I'm not exactly sure of that part, what the like substantial question was. But if that's my interpretation, I'll try to answer it this way. So first of all, I think for most communities on a small scale, on a hyperlocal scale, it is one of the best kept industrial wide secret that all the largest AI models, language models, must fit in memory, and therefore they fit in a USB stick. So it is not abnormal to run a model that is cutting edge in terms of performance once one knows what one is doing, for example, on topicalization, on summarization, and so on. So for example, one of the most used tools, Polis, for conversation across differences and finding the uncommon ground systemically, you can do topicalization, you can do summarization, and so on in a way that is free from hallucination, but you can do so using just a 20 billion parameter model currently available on OpenRouter, or really only running on this computer using LM Studio, and they're quick enough, they're fast enough, and they're accurate enough. And if it's not accurate enough, then you can run something like the safeguard model and find out exactly where it's not accurate enough, and also tune that text file to tune it locally. So the point here is that you do not have to wait for months for the frontier AI labs to come up the next generation. For most of the tasks that is involved in the democratic process, the existing open weight models are more than good enough to run the Jigsaw SenseMaker, Polis, or any related technologies. So I don't think we need to wait for the six-pack certification to roll out and be ticked by all the frontier AI labs. I think these Lego disputing blocks are already here. They're already good enough if one just assemble it the right way. Now about relational health, there's something called the Goodhart's law that says if you assign a number on whatever as a proxy metric of health, then people will optimize and maximize that number, and that number stops being a good number, which is why we don't in Taiwan measure like satisfaction score or things like that. Instead, we measure the time to the first bridging node. We find that people, if they have to wait for like 5 days to see a humor over rumor message, or if they on community nodes on x.com have to wait 5 hours to see the first truly bridging community node, it just doesn't work. But if you measure the latency, that is to say, the time to wait for the first good enough, so not perfect, good enough bridging node to happen, and then people get encouraged to participate more, because then you can add bridging to even longer distances and so on. So there's no single number in terms of the quality of the conversation, because that's entirely subjective to the community. But you can measure like the bandwidth of democracy, how much people is putting in, how much unique signal, and also the latency of democracy, how quickly can you turn around and have a group selfie. And if you have a good group selfie of a bridging note for every participant, tailor-made to their own community's vocabularies, and you can deliver that like every hour or so, then become not just a group selfie, but a group movie. And that works much better than if you have to wait 60 days for each iteration. So bandwidth and latency are the usual measurements, and I don't yet know a kind of scalar measurement for the relational health as something that cannot be Goodhart reward hacked. Yeah.
Yeah, and also I think to add to this, relational health is also something that keeps on evolving, right? So, and I think that what you say here, the snapshot of the movie, it's an ongoing project. So I think we need to also rethink the way that we usually like to have some sort of measure, happiness measure, and so on, and how that actually works in relation to the six-pack.
Exactly. So if the alignment by process matches the speed of the community, then it's healthy. But the community by itself have the utter authority in defining what constitutes as healthy in a qualitative sense. It's very difficult to define that, and maybe should not be defined from the outside. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a question here. Here we go.
Thank you so much, Audrey, for your wonderful presentation. a lot of the narratives around AI are framed around a race between the US and China of innovation. But the successful implementation of AI technologies and systems into societies rely on integration as well as innovation. To this end, the Edelman Trust Barometer recently released data saying that 70% of people in China and the so-called developing world trust AI, compared to 32% in the US and other Western countries. So it's kind of a dual question that I'd like to ask. One, how can we counter this narrative of a race to a more helpful frame? And two, what do you think some of the drivers are between this gap in trust that we're seeing worldwide, and how can we foster that? Foster more trust.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So very good question. The first one, I think, race dynamics sometimes was framed as the winner takes all, right? So it's like if you speed up to some degree and you reach escape velocity, you have this vertical takeoff, and then you capture all the rewards and your competitors lose everything. Except I think we're racing in a place where it's a very thick fog. It's very difficult to know, like when one does reach escape velocity, where the AI can recursively improve itself, whether the first car that is very fast with the gas pushed to the bottom and will like suddenly really win that reward, or whether it will accelerate even faster by falling off a cliff. That's even faster than on the road, but then you lose steerability at all. This is what I refer to when I say the vertical takeoff is also foreclosing every other possibility, locking into that fall and toward, I don't know, the abyss or something else, right? So I think the way to counter that frame then is not to say that we push the brakes or accelerate the pedal. That's entirely the wrong conversation, because we're heading off probably a cliff. Instead, we need to compete on the steerability, like the steering wheel. Like how flexible is the steering wheel? If we do see something really dangerous that's really cliff-like, how quickly can you pivot away from that trajectory? And that is the coordination potential of the society. So then that depends on how quickly can all the sector in the society, once people see something like a depleting ozone, agree on that. And the main factor preventing that is, as I mentioned, polarization per minute. The high ppm is the fog that prevents us from seeing the ground very clearly, or even if the driver now sees it clearly, prevents it from communicating to everybody else in the same car, right? So to lower the ppm through bridging conversations, to improve coordination, to have people's hand on the steering wheel by practicing the local governance, the local commies, and so on. I think that is very adjacent to this acceleration frame. So we're not calling to pause AI or stop AI or whatever, but we're saying actually without a functioning steering wheel, acceleration by itself doesn't do anything. So we need to accelerate the speed we can have the steering wheel steering. So that's the first answer. The second thing, I think I don't know whether citizens should trust the government. I think government should trust the citizens. And so for the power holders to maximally trust the citizens so that through power sharing, they can put their hands on the steering wheel the way that we in Taiwan have alignment assemblies and so on. I think that is important. And there's always a healthy level of distrust or mistrust from the citizenry to any concentration of power. And I think that's kind of healthy. So I wouldn't worry too much about like not matching the degree of self-reported trust in some of the more authoritarian regimes. They, after all, invest more in harmonizing the society than sometimes even military. And so I would want to compete not on their terms, but on the democratic society terms. And so I think the thing is that even with the mistrust, And even when people participate in a conversation like the alignment assembly, and even when they're in the 15% that did not get their favorite policy proposal into the final pack of countering deepfake scam, we still ask them, are you satisfied with the process? Do you think that this process, if not the minister running it, is trustworthy? And when people report that they can live with it, they're not very unhappy with how this result is obtained, I think this trust to the process is much more important than trust to particular outcome or particular technologies.
Thank you very much. I just have one question. It seems to me that throughout you very beautifully put that you take what it means of the locality and community for granted. I'm just wondering how you define this both sides and borders of community. I raise this question for two reasons. The first is that we all traveled globally and we always locate ourselves in overlapping communities. So that's the one reason. The second reason is that although as polarizing as Taiwan now is still a relatively, the provincial society which may share more value grounded, but just imagine that expand U model into great big society like America or the global size. How would you transfer U model into more global context? Thanks very much.
Great question. Yeah, I've been to 27 countries the past year. I switch time zone every 5 days. Fortunately, I don't have jet lag. There's an app called Time Shifter. If you use it, you get a jet boost instead of jet lag. But anyway, so because of this constant travel, I also observe in myself that I'm not really an individual with a stable community affiliation. I'm more like a collection of individuals or shards within a organic container, I guess. And then every time that I enter into a community, kind of one part of me gets activated and become kind of the spokesperson to the insights from the other parts of me. And I imagine it's not just me. It is probably a lived experience for many people who do have, for example, friends on the climate justice community and friends on the creation care biblical community. And so I think part of the insight that we have designing the so-called pro-social media or the bridging algorithms to make the anti-social media more pro-social is that in addition to cohering multiple communities or sub-communities together, it also serves as a cohering device for the internal individuals, that there's parts of me that don't talk to each other. And using this kind of bridging dictionaries, this humor over rumor and so on, one also bridges internally. And so this points to, I think, an answer to your question, which is we can see instead of communities having a hard boundary composed of individuals in a certain locality or sharing a certain identification, we can flip that and see individuals as intersections between communities with soft, porous borders, the way that I just described. I think Asek Molu recently in his upcoming book, Remaking Democracy, called this soft communitarianism. So instead of the hard border communitarianism, this is a single individual composed of intersection of multiple communities, serving kind of as an organic translator between those communities, each of which have a somewhat porous border, and then using language models, you can make communications bridges throughout that porous border, but without threatening the internal composition, the solidarity within those communities, respecting each other's customs while connecting them together using kind of weak ties between communities. And I think this is a very fruitful way to think about relational health, so that the relational health is always in the context of communities instead of just between two individuals, strictly dyadic relations. So this is the first answer to your question. I don't think there is a hard border. I think this is more a porous border. I think also that in Taiwan, it's funny that now people see Taiwan really as like doing very well in depolarization. We do have spikes of populism, of McCarthyism, or whatever. But within just a few short months, every time, we forced the populist reform because this way of depolarizing, community building, the civic gym, and so on, is more popular than populists. So in order for populists to retain their political seat, they have to reform. Our current Speaker of the Parliament, Han Kuo-yu MP, was the Kaohsiung city mayor and was probably the populist of his era in 2018, 2019. But then after a recall election and after many ways that the civil society expressed the misalignment of his platform versus with what he was actually doing, he now reformed and become the most moderate politician in his party. And so I think having a way to not just individually read the air to second guess one another, the social context when it comes to polarization, instead of having a way to write the air, to have a group selfie to become common knowledge. So everybody now knows that this is what the society wants and not what the populist claims. And then populist leader would have no other choice than just following what was just written into the air using this kind of broad listening techniques. I think that is how Taiwan depolarized from only 9% of approval rating in 2014 all the way to, by 2020, 71% when it comes to the approval rating of President Tsai Ing-wen. So to your kind of implied question, I think this can work in a nested fashion. So even if just a few hyperlocal towns, like the experiment we did in Bowling Green, Kentucky, in the US, to depolarize the conversation, just by asking everybody around that small town, what do you want Bowling Green be in the year 2050? And that open-ended question with this group selfie mechanism depolarized that particular locality. And many of their issues are actually translocal in a sense that many other towns of a similar scale are also grappling with similar issues when it comes to cultural identity and so on. And so then you can build this kind of scaling across instead of scaling up conversation to link such hyperlocal conversations together. And this is exactly what we're doing as part of the Google Jigsaw collaboration with the Scott Rasmussen, the Napolitan Institute, was called the We the People 250 project to replicate the Bowling Green experience in all the congressional districts in the US, but not aggregating it into one federal policy, but just revealing what people do actually agree with each other, even given the very high PPM in the US across different localities to form translocal alliances and enlarge this porous border of communities. I hope that answered your question.
Maybe just to add to that, so you can read more about the whole project on our website, sixpack.care.
Sixpack.care.
Yes.
Yeah, you can spell with a number or a English, both way works. We're very pluralistic. Yeah.
Yes, so you can read more about the project, and we'll also be having more case studies there where we're also looking at communities of shared experience. So it's really not just about the locality of, where people are, but also whether they have shared experiences, for example, family caregivers, what are their needs, and that may be across borders, and then looking specifically at cultural contexts or aging population specific problems there around older people and loneliness and so on. So there'll be case studies like that. So I will now thank you very much for your time, for all your questions, for joining us today. Please do join us for a light lunch. We've got some sandwiches over there, and we really want to connect with you. Mm-hmm. So please do get in touch in any way, email or so on through our website. Thank you very much, Audrey.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone.
Thank you.